Chapter 7. The Arrival in Galveston. The ship creaked and groaned as it slid into the port of Galveston, the Gulf breeze carrying the scent of salt and tar. For the first time in a week, James Anderson felt the solid ground of Texas beneath his boots. The city was alive with commerce. Wagons clattered over cobbled streets, sailors shouted from the docks, and merchants peddled their wares with booming voices. Galveston, unlike the war-torn lands they had left behind, felt like a place moving forward. They disembarked with what little they owned and made their way down the busy thoroughfare. Brownlow Carringer led the group, his Union cavalry officer's hat cocked back, the well-worn Confederate pants flapping with each step. Laura Kinsey stayed close to James, her eyes darting across the bustling storefronts, while Anna Kate trailed with a cautious gaze, ever watchful of strangers. Their first stop was a general store. The wooden floors creaked beneath their boots as James bought the essentials: sacks of salt, cornmeal, flour, and beans, a tin of coffee, and ammunition for the Sharps rifle he treasured. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with a pencil behind his ear, eyed them carefully, but said little. Commerce spoke louder than questions in Galveston. James inquired about wagons and horses. "Down the street, near the end of the block," the shopkeeper said, nodding with his chin. "Stable there's got a few left from the Army surplus. Won't be cheap, but they'll get you moving." Before the day's sun dipped below the horizon, they had secured 2 sturdy wagons and a pair of strong mules, with Brownlow mounted on a horse that suited his hard mountain frame. They left the noise and clamor of the city behind and made camp on a small creek west of town. The night was warm, and supper was simple: cornbread cooked over coals and a pot of beans simmering by the fire. As the stars spread across the Texas sky, James sat beside Laura, the firelight glinting off her hair. He thought about the long road behind them, the war, the blood, and the emptiness that had haunted his young years. At 17, he had gone off to fight, and now at 21, he longed for something more than survival. The next morning, they turned their wagons back into Galveston for one more errand. Standing before the Justice of the Peace, with Brownlow and Anna Kate as their witnesses, James Anderson and Laura Kinsey spoke their vows. The ceremony was brief and simple: $5 for the papers and a handshake from the old justice. As they left, hand in hand, James felt a quiet certainty in his chest. They had wagons, supplies, and a road ahead leading west. Somewhere beyond the horizon was the Brazos River and the promise of land, but for the first time in years, James had a wife by his side and a future worth fighting for.
Chapter 8. Westward from Galveston. Morning fog clung to the marshes as they prepared to leave Galveston behind. The city still bustled. Ships unloaded cargo from far ports, dock hands shouted for work, and the smell of tar, brine, and horse dung mixed in the humid air. For Amos, the freedman who had traveled with them since Louisiana, Galveston meant something different: opportunity. "I think I'll keep my family here," Amos said, his calloused hands resting on the rail of the wagon. His wife stood beside him, their 2 children clutching her dress. "Docks pay steady, and there's room for a man to start fresh." James nodded, respecting the man's choice. They traded fairly. The wagon and horses Amos had purchased were exchanged for $35 in greenbacks. Hands were shaken, goodbyes were said, and for the first time in weeks, their party grew smaller. 2 wagons now rolled westward, the sun beating down as the Gulf wind faded behind them. Dust rose with each turn of the wheels. Brownlow rode ahead on horseback, his Union officer's hat tipped low, eyes scanning the prairie. Anna Kate sat silent in the lead wagon, a squirrel rifle behind her just in case, while James and Laura rode in the second, their shoulders brushing as the day wore on. By dusk, they found a small grove of mesquite trees near a creek and made camp. Anna Kate chose the lead wagon to sleep in, her restless spirit preferring the solitude, while James and Laura climbed into the second, sharing the narrow space and the warmth of one another. Brownlow, ever the old mountain wolf, rolled his blanket out by the fire, his pistol belts crossed at arm's reach. That night, the stars burned sharply above the Texas sky. James lay awake for a time, listening to Laura breathe, feeling the quiet peace of a woman now called his wife. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in many years, he felt he was moving towards something, rather than away. James pulled Laura close to him as the temperature outside cooled. She fell asleep in his arms, worn out from another hard day of traveling. At dawn, they awoke to find Brownlow squatted over, cleaning 2 plump jackrabbits. His unkempt beard caught the first rays of sunlight as a grin split his weathered face. "Mornin'," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Some fried rabbit with biscuits and gravy'd be a fine meal 'fore we push on." Laura and Anna Kate joined in, gathering flour and lard to mix the dough, while coffee boiled black in a tin pot. The meal was humble but hearty: hot biscuits, fried rabbit, and gravy that smelled of pepper and fat. It felt like a breakfast for pioneers, a taste of the hard country that lay ahead, but it was good. By mid-morning, they were packed and rolling again, wheels creaking and hooves stirring the dry Texas dust. Luke Buchanan's land family lay just a few miles farther west, and whatever waited them there would be the first step toward their new lives.
Chapter 9. A Place to Call Home. The prairie rolled out wide and endless, the grass rippling like the sea as the 2 wagons creaked westward. By late afternoon, a cluster of cottonwoods marked the edge of a modest homestead. A 2-room cabin, smoke curling from its chimney, and a few outbuildings set against the fading sun. Luke Buchanan came out to meet them, a tall Texan with a wiry build and the hard hands of a man born to work the land. He wore a broad grin that deepened when he recognized James. "By God, it is you," Luke said, shaking James' hand hard enough to make his knuckles crack. "Thought the war had chewed you up and left you in some Yankee ditch." "Near enough," James replied, glancing at Laura beside him, "but I made it back, and I've brought company." Luke welcomed them all, Laura with a respectful nod, Anna Kate with a cautious look, and Brownlow with a soldier's knowing squint. Supper was cornbread, beans, and salt pork eaten by lamplight. The Buchanans offered them the hay barn for the night, a roof over their heads, and a soft place for the womenfolk to rest. For James and Laura, it was the first night truly alone as husband and wife. The air smelled of cut hay and horse leather, and through the chinks in the barn wall the stars watched them. No papers or preacher could have made it more binding than the quiet way she reached for his hand in the dark, their fingers twining like roots finding the same soil. At dawn, a rooster crowed and the world began to stir. James awoke to Laura sitting up, hair falling loose about her shoulders as she worked a comb through it. "It feels strange," she said softly, "waking up like this, knowing the road's behind us for a while." "Strange in a good way?" he asked, pulling on his boots. She smiled faintly. "In a good way." Outside, Brownlow was already up, smoking his pipe and talking low with Luke about fences and grazing land. Anna Kate came from the well with a bucket, her eyes sharp as always, but there was a softness at the edges now, something that came from a night without running. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like leaving. Luke talked about the next few days, an abandoned ranch near Comanche territory that would make a good home away from lawmen and tax collectors. The more he described it, the more everyone agreed it would be a good homestead, so it was decided they would travel to it the next morning. Chapter 10. Shadows on the Brazos. The morning broke cool and gray as they left the Buchanan homestead, 2 wagons rolling westward with the Brazos River set as their next marker. The land began to flatten, the grass whispering in long golden waves. Luke rode point, Brownlow at his side, the old Fayetteville rifle laid across his saddle. By midday they forded a shallow creek and spotted distant riders along a low ridge, shapes against the sun, moving like ghosts. "Kiowa," Luke said, narrowing his eyes. "Mostly peaceful if you don't give 'em reason, but they'll take what isn't tied down. The Comanche, though," he spat in the dust, "they're a different breed, fast, quiet, and mean as a cornered wolf." Brownlow chuckled low in his throat.
Sioux fear the Comanche, and that's saying something. I fought Sioux as a galvanized Yankee in Nebraska. They're brave and sharp as any blade, but even they whisper about the Comanche. Cheyenne, too. This far west, you're in their shadow soon enough. Another 10 miles and we're in their hunting ground. Brownlow shifted in the saddle, the sun catching his Union officer's hat. Luke gave it a pointed glance. I'd find a better lid, Mr. Carringer. Comanche hate the bluecoats near as much as old Jeff Davis did. Brownlow snorted and dug into his saddlebag, pulling free a battered coonskin cap. Will this do? Luke grinned. Perfect. By nightfall, they made camp along the Brazos, big cottonwoods whispering above, the river glinting like black glass. A fire crackled low, throwing long shadows over the wagons. Supper was simple: beans, salt pork, and river water boiled for coffee. Luke and Anna Kate sat across the flames from one another, their eyes meeting often in the flicker of light. It didn't escape James's notice, nor Laura's. Even Brownlow, rolling his smoke with a sly look, caught it. Finally he spoke, voice low, but cutting through the campfire murmur. I may be your uncle by marriage, Luke, but I'm her guardian in truth. If you aim to court her, best say so now rather than skulking like a fox in the hedgerow. Luke blinked, the tips of his ears flushing red. He looked at Anna Kate, who only smiled, calm, knowing, unafraid. Yes, sir, Luke said at last. I would like that. The fire popped, an ember leapt, and for a moment the Brazos carried their silence downstream. In the wilds of Texas, that was as close to a promise as a man could make.
Chapter 11. First Blood on the Brazos. The night along the Brazos was restless. The fire had burned low, only coals glowing beneath the stars, when Brownlow's eyes snapped open. He had that feeling, a pressure in the dark, like a coyote watching the fold. A faint rustle came from the brush beyond the wagons, then another. Up, Brownlow hissed. Indians! Luke was already awake, hand on his rifle. James stirred Laura and reached for the sharps. Shadows slipped along the tree line, lean forms on fast ponies. A pair of arrows hissed through camp, one sticking in a wagon wheel, the other thudding into the earth near the fire. Comanche, Luke muttered, testing us. A shot cracked. Brownlow's Colt barked flame into the dark. The shadows scattered, melting back toward the river. There was no charge, no full assault, just a taste of what waited in this country. Dawn came gray and watchful. Tracks were found near the camp, barefoot prints and pony hooves, but no scalps taken, no blood spilled save for a single smear where Brownlow's shot had hit something in the brush. They are testing us, Luke said. This was the first. By afternoon they turned northward and came upon it. The old abandoned ranch, the adobe wall slouched but standing, the gate swinging on one hinge. Mesquite grew in the yard, and the well was choked with tumbleweed. This place has been dead all my life, Luke said as he dismounted. My Uncle Elijah used to bring me here to camp when we hunted. Belonged to a Spanish family. Comanche put an end to that long before the war. Never been claimed since. Close to Comanche country, but that keeps the carpetbaggers and government men away. Probably get it for back taxes if we cared to. The group stood in the dry wind, weighing it. The walls held, the hearth was sound, and the land had a quiet about it. It'll do, James said finally. They set to work. The roof leaked, but was patched with planks salvaged from the leaning outbuildings. The stable sagged, but they propped it, filled holes with brush and rough-cut boards. The barn was nothing but ashes and memory, but they staked out where a new one would stand. That night, the wagons were drawn close to the old Spanish-style house. James and Laura patched together a bed frame from what was left and slept in it. Man and wife now, with the roof over their heads. Brownlow settled in a rocking chair they'd brought from Galveston, a Colt in his lap, eyes always on the dark horizon. Luke lingered at the doorway, eyes on the road east. He said, I'll fetch lumber and supplies and bring my kin to see the place. She only smiled. We'll keep the hearth warm. And so, the first walls of their new life stood,
patched, crooked, but theirs.
Chapter 12. Watchers on the Horizon. At first light, Luke saddled 2 horses and hitched them to a lighter wagon. Anna Kate climbed aboard with a faint smile, her hair tied back, her eyes full of the long road east. Brownlow gave Luke a slow, measuring look before he swung into the saddle. "You keep her safe, boy," he said. "She's under my watch till I know better." Luke nodded, glancing at Anna Kate before turning the team toward the sunrise. "I aim to, Mr. Brownlow. We'll bring back what's needed. Lumber, seed, and maybe a few good hands if my folks can spare 'em." James and Laura watched them go until the dust faded, leaving only the prairie wind. Then they turned to the work ahead. The old ranch stood like a half-buried memory. Its adobe walls held firm, but the shutters were rotted, the floor in places soft with age. James pried boards from a collapsed shed, using them to mend the stable's walls. Laura swept the hearth, patched curtains from old sacking, and boiled water in a blackened pot she'd found in the cellar. By midday, smoke curled from the chimney for the first time in years. "Feels almost like a home," Laura said, wiping her brow. "Almost," James answered. "Needs a roof that don't leak, a barn that don't burn, and a field that ain't full of thistle. But it's a start." That evening, Brownlow came back from a long circle with his carbine slung low. He squatted by the fire, staring toward the western ridge. "Comanche," he said flatly. 3, maybe 4 riders, just watching. Didn't come close, but they wanted me to see them." Laura set down the pot she was stirring. "Will they attack?" "Not yet. They're measuring us, like wolves in the brush." Night fell with a restless stillness. Luke slept with the sharps across his knees. Laura kept the lantern trimmed low. Brownlow took the rocking chair on the porch, eyes half closed, but his hand never far from the Colt. Far out on the ridge, where the prairie kissed the stars, a thin curl of smoke rose and vanished.